there are actually very few people, if any, on a given production where that's true. Because it's the only art form where like 100+ people come together to make different pieces of it. So I feel like by doing those 3 roles together in my films, I get the complete artistic fulfillment of the whole process. I will say that I like acting and writing better than producing, in the sense that I will act and write on other people's stuff because I love those things, and I and I produce out of necessity on mine.
Yeah.
And with Bite Me, I know you went on a cross-country tour. What made you and your crew decide to do that? And what would you say are the most important things you learned from that experience?
Yeah, so my first feature film, Imagine I'm Beautiful, we made for $80,000. And we got a theatrical distribution deal from a distributor for that movie, which seemed like we had won the lottery. Like, we felt like Cinderella. I mean, it is so rare for a film of that budget level with no name actors. Nobody knew who we were. Like, this was huge. And then after about the first 6 years of that distribution deal, we had received $5,000 total in earnings from that film through a distributor. And we were like, this, wait a minute. Like, it was really fun to have a theatrical distribution deal through a distributor, but like, we had investors, like at a certain point you have to make money on these movies. So then we started asking around and asking all of our friends who are filmmakers, and this is something that people really don't like to talk about, right? It's actually really hard to get people to tell you what they actually made on their movies. But what we began to piece together is that basically that was happening to everybody, that even the people who won the lottery of actually getting a distribution deal were seeing almost no money on the back end. And why that is true is a whole other conversation that we don't need to get into necessarily right now. But the end result was that by the time we made my second feature film, Bite Me, we were like, this seems like insanity to keep making films and then throwing them into the system that is not turning any money on the other side. So we were like, let's just try to distribute it ourselves. We know who our audience is. We know where they are. We can book the theaters ourselves. We can get it on the platforms, or the digital platforms ourselves. Like, what are we giving a distribution company 30 to 50% of the profits when basically we could do everything better ourselves? So I had a dream, a literal dream is what happened in November of 2018, that we were in an RV driving around the country on something called the Joyful Vampire Tour of America. And I called my producing partner, Sarah Wharton, the next morning, and I said, so maybe this is insane, but what if we just rented an RV and drove the film around the country? And she said, she is amazing, and she said, yes, and let's put fangs on the RV. And so we did. We ended up booking a 51 screening, 40 city, 3-month tour. And so in May of last year, which now seems, in the COVID era, this seems even crazier than it was at the time. But in May of 2019, my husband, myself, and a documentary filmmaker moved into an RV for 3 months and drove 13,000 miles around the country, screening the film in a giant circle, 51 times all around the country. And it was called the Joyful Vampire Tour of America. And the documentary filmmaker made this docu-series in real time each week as we went. And one of the things I'm proudest of, so not only did she capture the amazing wackiness of this tour, so we invited audience members to come in costume, like we had joyful vampire balls after every screening. So that was just totally magical and wild and great on its own. And she captured that in the documentary. But the other thing we did is we had said to ourselves from the beginning, we want to give everything we're learning to other filmmakers, so that whether we succeed or not in terms of turning a profit, that other people can take what we did and then innovate on it and do this themselves. So in the docuseries, we reveal everything, like how many tickets we sold each week, how much money we made, how much money we spent, how we did our marketing, everything. How you empty poop out of an RV, which was not my finest hour. But anyway, so, and all of that's on YouTube, so for free. So if anybody's interested, there's the Joyful Vampire Tour of America series on YouTube. It's very fun. Kiwi Callahan made it. She's amazing. So what I learned is that we made more money in ticket sales alone during the first week of that tour than I made from my entire first feature film through a distributor.
Wow.
So what I learned is that, again, we are better off building our own systems.
Wow.
That's crazy.
It's just, it's honestly just so eye-opening, and as financing is such a huge, I mean, that is one of the most essential parts if you actually want to make the film. And we see that the reason female documentary filmmakers largely do quite a lot better than fiction filmmakers is because they don't have to go into these executive boards and ask for money, which are largely led by white men who don't trust women with money. And so when you can and you see that it's a lot different when you can do the crowdfunding and when you can distribute it in different ways. I've also, the artist struggle have been glorified quite a lot, but it shouldn't be. And there's so many different ways, like as you see, like doing that tour, that's incredible. And I can't imagine also just getting to meet these people, like that must have been so, like, wow.
Yeah. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life, bar none. I mean, it was, and it made me a better artist, because to travel to Vicksburg, Mississippi and hear what they thought about my movie, and then go to Seattle and hear what they, like, the level of audience feedback and engagement that I got to experience in response to this thing we had made was so much richer and more beautiful than you would normally get.
You get that community. That's beautiful. I also know, I know you've written your book. It's fantastic. For anyone out there, please go read it. It's worth every penny. You will probably cry, but at the end you will also be radicalized and ready for the revolution.
Thank you. So at the same time that my book came out, Gloria Steinem's latest book came out, and the title of her most recent book is "The Truth Will Set You Free, but First It Will Really Piss You Off." And I feel like that's the perfect description of the experience of reading my book, which is like, right, you might cry in the middle, but keep going, because I promise there's hope at the end.
Yes, and I know that you also do screenwriting courses. Amazing. Like, what was that? Was that just wanting to bring other people in, teach other people? How has that been for you? I know you're about to start one, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's been a huge gift, and that actually started with COVID. It's been one of the surprising gifts of this time. So what I've realized in teaching screenwriting is that the way screenwriting is taught, not that this should surprise us, but the way screenwriting is taught is from the white male perspective.
Really?
Yes. So if you look at like all of the great screenwriting books, like the ones that everybody uses to teach screenwriting out of, they are all written by white men. So here I was. So people had kept asking me to teach screenwriting. And I was like, I've never taken a screenwriting class. How can I teach screenwriting? And I haven't. Like I figured it out by doing. So then I started reading all these books. So I was like, okay, well, I better read at least some screenwriting books before I'm going to try to teach it. And as I was going through, I was like, holy shit. Like, baked into these books is the formula that is the white male view of the world. Oh dear. So then the screenwriting has become, how do you teach women? I mean, so far all my students have been women, which is probably not surprising. How do you teach women to write screenplays when we have very few examples of screenplays that have actually been written from the female perspective, and like partly because so many screenplays that have been written by women are still written through that white male gaze. So that's been the exploration, but it's so exciting. So in these classes, I feel like we're sort of, you know, out in the Wild West, just trying stuff, and like, but I feel like my job as a screenwriting teacher in this context is to not set up rules of any kind, or like be like, here you have to do, like, this is what a screenplay is, but instead with each person to sort of draw out the stories that they have naturally inside, and also draw them out in a way that they come out in the modality that is natural to that person, that woman, to telling stories. And the results have been so exciting. Like at the end of every screenwriting class, I'm like, these screenplays are so much more interesting than any movie that is coming out right now. So then I also started teaching classes in production, in like indie film development and production, so that hopefully now these screenplays can also get made. So anyway, it's been very exciting.
That's awesome. Absolutely love that.
And with your book, one line that stuck out to me was, the industry I'd spent my entire life working and aching to be a part of simply didn't want me, not because I wasn't talented, but because I was the wrong kind of woman. Can you expand that for our listeners?
Yeah, so the reason the book is called The Wrong Kind of Women is that, so I did over 100 interviews with women, mostly women and some men too, up and down the industry. And I was just listening to women's stories, and basically to a person, the story was, oh, and then they told me I had to change, like if I could just change this about myself, then they would hire me. Or if I could just be a little more like this, or just a little bit more like that, or a little bit less like this, then, and I was slowly realizing, like, oh, so basically all of us are individually told that we're the wrong kind of woman. Like, it's not that they don't like women, it's just like we're the wrong kind. And so what happens then is, in isolation, again, if this isn't explained to you, what happens is you go, oh, it's not that they don't like women, I'm not the right kind of woman. When in reality, there is no right kind of woman, they just don't like women. Or they like them in a very specific context, but they are not interested in having us have power or perspective or voices.
Now, we do always ask about women who do inspire us, personal and professional. Is there anyone you want to give a shout out? We say anyone, but you know, it's always more than one.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ava DuVernay has been a huge inspiration to basically all of us. What I really respect about her is not just her as a filmmaker, but also the way she has gained a platform and then used that weaponized that platform to elevate other women. Something that is really interesting and that I explore a bit in the book is it can be easy for people to rail against the system, rail against the machine until they're in it. And then you see a lot of people go very quiet and get very timid the second they are chosen by the system. And something I really admire about Ava is that she hasn't done that. And she has really continued to speak truth to power. And I find her incredibly inspiring. I mean, there are many. I could keep going.
Quickly, just before we finish, just quickly to steer back, when you were talking about your cross-country tour, I know you said, you know, you were very transparent when it came to, you know, talking about how much money you made each week, and, you know, about your finance. You're very transparent, and you spoke about that a lot in the docuseries. And I think for our listeners, I think that's extremely important, especially women. I think we find it hard to talk about money sometimes. And I think I would say thank you for talking about in your docuseries. I'm definitely going to watch that now. And yeah, I think women need to talk about that more. So if our listeners is going to take something away from this podcast, I think that was really important for you to say. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll yes and that, in the sense that I think it's totally important for women to talk about money. And I also just think it's important for us to be transparent with each other in general about everything, because part of the way the powerful stay powerful is by isolating us from each other, making us ashamed to speak about our experiences. And therefore, we continually end up in these bubbles of feeling like we're the only ones, we're the problem, it's not. And the more that we share information, the more it becomes increasingly apparent that actually it's the system that's broken and not us. Mm-hmm. So I think transparency is important on that level. And it's also important on the level that if we are going to build our own sandbox, as I hope very sincerely that we do, that's hard, right? It's not that hard to just like invent a new industry alongside one that exists. So if we're going to succeed at that, we're going to have to do it together, and we're going to have to do it in sharing information and being like, hey, I tried this thing, it didn't work, but like, here's this part of it that did work, maybe you could try, and then you take that. And but unless we're sharing results and information, we're not going to succeed.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Thank you for coming on. I think, well, me and Avita were so excited for you to come on for so long now, I think since July, and we knew this was going to be a great episode, and you've just proved us right. I think our listeners are going to take so much lessons and from this podcast. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for speaking about all of this. We need as many voices as we can have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is there anything you want to plug, promote? Where can people find you?
They can find me on my website, which is naomimcdougalljones.com. And you can find the book, the films, the web series, all of that there. I think I would just rather end by saying, again, to anybody listening who is a woman or a person of color or somebody whose voice has been systematically and on purpose kept out of the system, that it is your civic duty and social duty and moral duty to tell your stories and find a way to make them and get them to audiences. And that is the only North Star you need to pay attention to.